Well, hello, and welcome to an exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers. This is officially the Skeptics and Seekers off season. We're done with season 3. It's over and done. It's behind us. It's the off season where I get back to my regular life and I don't do shows. And so here I am doing a show. I'm really gonna do better this off season though, so there won't be too many of these. But this is one that we've been looking forward to. It was actually scheduled for the regular season, but things happened and we couldn't get it in there, and so I'm very happy to be able to do it now. This is the special with Dale and Val, two of the bigger brains that we deal with here on Skeptics and Seekers, and it's a good thing those brain sizes are what they are, because we're dealing with the issue of free will. Oh boy. So without any further ado, because honestly in this subject, ado is all I can offer, I'm going to turn it over to Val, and then Dale will come in, and then the show will mostly be out of my hands. Val, take it away.
Hi, David. Hi, Dale.
Hi.
So I'm here. I suggested a sort of talk about free will, and whenever I come on the show, I'm always trying to term it more as a talk than a debate, because maybe it's because I just don't want to put that much preparation into something, and so I prefer it to be closer to a casual conversation back and forth to shoot out different views. And so I am here to sort of talk about, and I guess defend, a view of free will called compatibilism. And I'm going to sort of start off with a statement that sort of sets the lay of the land, as it were, about what the whole issue is with free will and how it sort of you lead to the various views on free will. And then I can get to discussing compatibilism. And as far as compatibilism goes, for me, I'm not here to say that I've solved free will, of course, or anything like that, or even that any philosopher has. It's more that whenever I've seen free will discussed, written about, and when I've engaged in free will conversations, especially most of my free will conversations are actually with other atheists or naturalists, and they get into heated debates, and I've always found that fascinating. It's more like whenever I think about the subject of free will, I find myself falling into compatibilist trains of thought. It makes the most sense to me once you trace out the implications of what's possible in the world and why, and what is consonant with our normal modes of thinking about the world that we live in and about ourselves. And when I listen to free will skeptics, it just feels like I'm hearing mistakes. It's, I'm not sure that I can sort of prove free will by the end, but it feels like I want to clear some brush at least along the way to make some ground for compatibilism. Whether we get all the way or not, I can't say, and that'll come in conversation. So I guess to start off, a little lay of the land here. So if we ask what free will is, if you go to the various philosophy books or philosophy references, you'll get variations of what free will is, and very often you'll find places are defending a certain free will thesis, and so they're going to conflict. And so it can actually be, I found, a bit more helpful to just go to standard dictionary definitions or even Wikipedia, where really those seem to produce some of the most broad versions that seem to sort of correspond with what the average person may accept as free will. So if we just even take Wikipedia with a little addendum I had, it's just free will is the ability of agents to make choices unimpeded. So it's pretty simple. Word choices refer to selecting from among possible alternative actions. So that's what thinking I have a choice generally seems to mean. I had a choice to either walk to work or ride my bike. Means that those are possible alternative actions I can take. I chose to walk to work, but I could have done otherwise. I could have ridden my bike to work. And it is the concept of I could have done otherwise, and the concept of possibilities that arise from the claim I could do otherwise, and what we could mean by that, that really sort of is the meat of the free will debate, or at least it starts off the free will debate. Okay, so now why is there a debate? You know, what is in fact the purported problem of free will to begin with? So I'm just going to read a very brief opening paragraph from I think a classic philosophy text I've always liked, and it's the problem of freedom and determinism. And so the nature of the problem, it goes, the problem of freedom and determinism is basically a paradox. A paradox arises when two equally evident assumptions lead to apparently inconsistent results. What paradox is connected with the problem of freedom and determinism? It is this. Determinism is the thesis of universal causation, the thesis that everything is caused. On the other hand, the doctrine of freedom maintains that some of our actions are free. Both of these things seem to be true. We believe both that everything is caused, and we believe both that everything is caused and that some of our actions are free. However, these two beliefs lead to results that are apparently inconsistent. For if everything is caused, then so are those actions we allege to be free. But then they are the result of some causes which made us perform the actions, and therefore actions are not free. So in addition to believing that everything is caused and that some of our actions are free, we also believe that if our actions are caused, then they are not free. So that's the paradox in our ordinary beliefs. What happens here is those two intuitions seem to lead the dance. I find free will to be maybe the single most maddening conversation, where two sides just can't even understand each other, and it just seems to be explained by the strength of the intuitions that are operating here, and which side you go on free will seems to come down to, generally, I think, which intuition feels strongest to you, I guess. So to go back to it, again, determinism is the concept of universal causation. Everything has a cause. And the implications are of unbroken causation stretching over backwards, ever backwards and forward. So it's like a line of tips over dominoes. So long as the dominoes at time t1 are causing dominoes at time t2 to fall, those dominoes must fall. So every event at this moment in the universe, including our actions, are being caused, that is our domino of our choice, is being pushed over by previous dominoes in the chain like everything else. Another way of putting this apparent inevitability has been put this way, is that determinism is the thesis that there is at any instant exactly one physically possible future, the one that follows inevitably from the chain of causation. So that really, on its face, that intuition of determinism seems to clash with our belief that our actions are free and that we could have done otherwise. How could we have done otherwise if there is only one physically possible future at any moment? And this is where the intuitions take hold. If determinism, the intuition of universal causation, really sinks in, then you can be pushed to say that free will is incompatible with determinism. Your stronger intuition about the apparent implication of determinism will lead you to declare, determinism is true, therefore free will is incompatible with determinism, and free will must be false. It's a false theory. It's just not true that we have free will. And usually folks that go this way with their intuition to determinism are called hard determinists or hard incompatibilists. And I tend to, because there are various versions of this, I tend to use the phrase free will skeptics, if you're a skeptic about free will. On the other hand, there's the intuition when we are making choices that we actually can choose between, say, salmon or steak for dinner, and really could have chosen otherwise. That just seems so apparent to us when we're making choices, it can seem just impossible to actually abandon that. And so if that is your stronger intuition that you can't seem to abandon, it can push you to that side. And therefore you'll declare that free will is true, therefore determinism must be false. or at least determinism is false in regard to our choice making. So both of those moves that take people in opposite directions, determinism is true, therefore free will is false, and free will is true, therefore determinism is false, are called incompatibilist positions. Both hold that free will is incompatible with determinism. Only in one case, the conclusion leads to free will skepticism, that it doesn't actually exist, and the other incompatibilist intuition leads someone to the belief in the existence of free will and the rejection of determinism. And usually that type of free will is called libertarian free will, which we can get to. But there's a third position on free will, and it's one that, in fact, the majority of philosophers actually take, and that's of compatibilism. And that is the thesis that free will is actually compatible with determinism, compatible with physical causation. So that's generally what I hold to. And the concept of compatibilism goes really far back, and as far back as Aristotle and Epictetus in the 1st century CE, etc. So just a note about compatibilism. Free will being compatible with determinism. Compatibilism doesn't necessarily hold that determinism is true, so much as that determinism, if true, doesn't threaten free will. And some compatibilists will argue that we generally want some level of causal determinism to be true to have free will. But anyway, so I don't have to establish that some absolute determinism is true, that there's no indeterminism anywhere. It may be, in fact, that as physics seems to suggest, there is indeterminism somewhere in the system at the quantum level. But even if everything is not fully or absolutely determined, we can say that the physical world at least seems sufficiently determined at the macro level that we interact at. So, so long as we as physical beings are as physically determined as water flowing downhill or rocks falling to the ground or handheld calculators, that's enough determinism to raise threat to our freedom, it would seem. Let's see. Now, so for the purpose of arguing compatibilism, I'm going to assume this physical determinism of the type an incompatibilist believes threatens free will. We are physical systems situated in the physical universe following all the same physical rules as rocks, water, starlight, electrons, what have you. And we can even postulate, for sake of argument, Laplace's famous demon. And that's the being who has a godlike view of events. Because on determinism, the previous state of the universe determines the next state of the universe. If at the beginning of the universe, or actually at any time in the universe, the demon knew the location and motion of every physical unit, every atom, etc., the demon could perfectly predict the next and all following states of the universe. That is, in effect, he could predict the future perfectly, and that would include all of our choices as well, since we're just collections of atoms in the universe too, in the same causal chain. But even that, says a compatibilist, that doesn't in the slightest threaten our free will, or at least free will worth wanting, as Daniel Dennett would put it. That will seem immediately counterintuitive likely, but it's actually, a compatibilist would claim, what follows when you trace out the implications of our other beliefs and intuitions. It actually ends up upholding some of our basic intuitions of choice making. So any thesis of free will, especially compatibilist, has to answer essentially two questions. Does it make sense within the context of physical determinism to say we have free will? Or that is to say that we have real choices, that alternative actions are possible, that we are free to choose them, that the choices are ours, etc. A lot of this boils down to say, does it make sense to say we could do otherwise in a physically determined system? And then the second part is, if we can make the case that there is a sense of could do otherwise that is compatible with determinism, does this capture enough of what people generally mean by free will? And so I would say basically yes and yes. In other words, we need to see what we actually mean when people talk about free will, and to be careful to refute or correct only those portions of the folk conception that are actually wrong, while preserving those portions that are true and useful. And this is the last sort of flag I want to put in the ground here before I finish. Take a break, as it were. We have to be careful, I think, of mistaking the thing being explained mistaking explanation with the thing being explained. And this is a conflation I see happening very often in incompatibilists, who will say things like determinism would mean that free will is an illusion once you find out, say that physical causation seems true. What you're trying to explain is generally the general experience of making daily choices. So, I could have, if I'm going out the door and I see my bike there, and I could decide to ride my bike to work, or I could instead walk to work. I have a feeling like I really could, both of those options are open to me, that I really could ride my bike to work if I wanted to, or I could walk to work if I wanted to. And if I choose to walk, I can look backwards and say I could have, it really does feel like I could have ridden my bike to work if I wanted to. So it's that sort of daily, and that expands to all choices, whether it's what's for dinner up to moral choices. This sensation of choice, of having a choice. That's a phenomenon that free will, any free will theory is trying to explain. And so we can't conflate a free will theory or explanation with the phenomenon you're trying to explain. So the danger of that you can see if you, for instance, in the old theories of what it was for something to be alive, what did life consist in? Well, there was an observation that you had to explain. There really did seem to be a difference between your cat when it was alive and your cat when it was dead. All the things the cat could do when it was alive, it can't do when it's dead anymore. But it does seem to be a real difference between what the things that we consider alive and things that aren't alive, like chairs and rocks and that kind of stuff. And the explanation was that back then was that there was some sort of life force animating things that made things alive, the elan vital. And now when that turns out to be not true, and it's eventually replaced by something better, which we might call metabolism at this time scientifically. That doesn't mean that actually life was an illusion, that it wasn't true there was actual life. It just means you've replaced the erroneous explanation with an actual explanation that explains it. You could say the same about sunsets and sunrise. If you have to be careful about calling those illusions in the sense of being completely untrue, that are dispelled when you come up with the right the right explanation. So when you find out that it's not due to geocentrism with the sun. The sun rises and it goes over our head and then it sets relative to the horizon. So rises, the phenomenon that we're observing is the sun rising in an angle relative to the horizon and setting relative to the horizon. And that actually doesn't go away when you find out the explanation for that isn't that the sun is revolving around the earth. The explanation is actually that the earth is revolving around the sun and the earth is revolving. So that's still there. Another example would be solidity. Solidity, if you dismiss it as an illusion, you are throwing away too many babies with the bathwater there, because yes, if you suddenly discover that if something looks solid to us, it looks like completely, I guess the impression is completely contiguous matter, matter that's completely unbroken, right? But then you find out in physics that no, there's actually a lot of empty space there in between them. And so some people can say, oh, well, solidity is an illusion. It doesn't really exist. Well, no, it does exist. On the macro level that we interact with it, there really is things to observe about the differences between things that are in solid form and liquid form and gaseous form. And what scientists have done is simply explain it at a deeper level. That's why they've retained the categories of solid, gas, liquid. And that's why you're going to have a very different experience still in the macro level if you decide to dive into water that's frozen solid versus in a liquid state. So we've got to be careful about saying this is what we got to be careful about saying, for instance, a libertarian version of free will is free will. I would say that people tend to come up with explanations for what free will is, explanations for free will choices, and say, well, if that's not how it happens, well, then we don't really have free will. I think that's an error. I feel like I've already talked enough, so I can get to other things and explaining compatibilism more in detail. But if maybe Dale might want to break in and say something.
Okay, go ahead, Dale.
Okay, so I'll just give like again, a very brief introduction before I get into the main thing, but I'm pretty sure David's going to want to give his intro for the hard determinism position before we get into all that. So yeah, basically Val has covered the different positions and that sort of thing and how.
Okay, let me just interrupt you real quick. Would you like me to just do my piece right now so that you can move in uninterrupted with Val after your piece? Because I have surprisingly little to say after Val's speech.
Sure, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so I would say that a lot of my objections are moot, frankly, at this point, because I think those explanations are fine, and I'm willing to accept conditionally Val's last argument that really what we're talking about is kind of a matter of semantics. When we talk about whether a thing is free will or isn't free will, and so I will hold that loosely. I would say, though, that on a subject like free will, there is a certain thing we have in our mind for what that means. And I think it is fair to say that for the thing that most people are thinking about when they think about free will, which is libertarian free will, I think it's fair to say that doesn't exist. And I don't think it quite is fair to say, well, it does exist, but you should call it something else. The thing that they are thinking about doesn't actually exist to my mind, but I'm willing to hold that conditionally to see how this goes. I also would like Val, and maybe Dale in his questioning can push Val toward it. This modal logical instinct that we could do something other than what we have done. So this is a challenging idea for me that I would need to have broken down in the conversation, because it's not something that we can experiment on. And the reason we can't experiment on it is because we have one universe and time moves in one direction, at least for creatures like us on our level. And so it's one thing to say, I could have worn a different shirt this morning, but those are just words that I'm saying after the fact. I can't go back and see if I could have worn a different shirt this morning. And so there's a little bit of an unfalsifiable thing here, where it's all post hoc that we say we could have done something else because we feel like we could have done something else. And so this is another thing that needs to be unpacked for me. Is that feeling justified? Well, I can't say that it's justified because I don't know what is inside of that decision tree. In other words, how did I choose the shirt that I wore this morning? Let's say that there's some kind of calculus going on in my subconscious that I am not aware of and that I have no access to. There may have been some good calculus for why I put this shirt on that would have, in fact, eliminated me ever choosing to put a different shirt on. But without access to that calculus, in that decision tree, I can't say whether I could have done it or not. And I think just to assume that I could have done it is to assume the decision was random. but I don't believe in randomness, so that's part of the problem. And so if the decision is not random and the decision is based on something, but that something is out of my reach and I can't tell what it was based on, then I actually don't have any right to say I could have chosen otherwise, because I did choose whatever passes for choosing. And that had good reason in my subconscious to choose it. And so it could be that, I thought if I picked up that other shirt, maybe there's a snake under that shirt. And if I moved that other shirt, I would die. None of this is true. There are no snakes in my shirt drawer. But I'm just saying, if you don't have access to the decision tree and the calculus, you are ignoring the possibility that you had some very good reasons why the choice was narrowed down to what it was. And you cannot say with any accuracy that there is another world where you would have made another choice. So it seems very easy and cheap to say that, but I need to see that spooled out to see how that actually works. And so those are the only things that kind of sit with me, and I'm just putting them out there so that as the two of you have this conversation, maybe you'll remember the little people and address some of that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dale.
Can I just mention, David, would it be okay if I mentioned one more thing? Because I realized that I think if I quickly capped off what I had said, it kind of sets things up better, especially for what Dale is going to say as well. Is that all right?
That's fine. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my mic off, and I'm going to consider myself no longer a host or moderator, and I just have the best seats in the house to watch the gallery and might occasionally interrupt. So with that, I'm going to let the two of you conduct your business.
And I'll just say, David J., I did have this, this is a common argument against compatibilism, that it kind of entails fatalism. So yes, I will be asking Val about that, and how that relates to people like G. Moore and stuff like that. So yeah, go ahead, Val.
Thanks, Dale. Yeah, I just thought I essentially, I think I should have gotten to this point before I stopped. I should just say that, so David's question about unfalsifiability of saying that I could have done otherwise does seem to be true of libertarian free will, but isn't true of a compatibilist position. A compatibilist position would make it absolutely trivial to demonstrate that David could have worn another shirt, done otherwise. He would simply put on another shirt and to demonstrate it. But that's what we'll get to. So now I guess I want to say is that free will skeptics, basically, and libertarians, they tend to sort of end up in the same place in one respect, and that is their idea of figuring out what it would mean to actually be free. In a way, they sort of agree. So just a real simple example of libertarian free will. There's varieties of libertarian free will, just as there is compatibilism and everything else. But somebody like William Lane Craig always makes things very simple. So I'll just say what he said. So libertarian free will involves indeterminism of some sort, sort of a gap or division in the causal deterministic chain, so that the decision is only up to you. So as William Lane Craig put it, a Christian philosopher, simply, to be free is to be free of causal determinants outside of oneself. Your choice is up to you. It is not determined by causal factors outside of yourself. End quote. So someone must be the ultimate or originating cause of his actions. They have to be sort of causa sui in the traditional phrase. And God would be the ultimate example, in Craig's view, of libertarian free will, insofar as there are no causal factors outside of God when he exists alone without causing the universe. So there's no outside causal factors that could have determined God's decision to create the universe. Only God himself was the cause, making him fully responsible, etc. On this form of libertarianism, in a sense, we are all little gods, and that we've been imbued with this buck stops here contra causality in regard to our choices. Each choice we make is essentially a little miracle happening outside the constraints of the physical world, just like God's. And compatibilists and free will skeptics would say pretty much every version of libertarian free will involves a little unexplained miracle. But what I'm getting to about that is that there, both the free will skeptic and the libertarian generally would say that you could, to be free, to say that I could do otherwise in any substantial sense is you could turn back the clock on the universe to the state at which you made your decision, and with all antecedent causes being in place, every state being the same, you could have chosen otherwise. And the free will skeptic ultimately looks at that and says, number one, that's just not how physical determinism works, so it can't be true. Number two, it seems sort of incoherent to even say it, so free will isn't true. And the libertarian goes on to say, no, that's coherent, and that's essentially how things work. And I think sort of both of those are mistakes. I think that simply does not represent how we are actually reasoning when we are making choices. And that's what I'll get to, but floor is to you, Dale.
Okay, so I think a lot has been said in sort of setting up the positions already and where we stand. So yes, I take a libertarian free will stance. I think that that's the only logical and properly basic beliefs tell us that this is the common sense position. So yeah, basically in the show, Val wants to have his view of compatibilism sort of under evaluation. So this isn't so much going to be about me defending libertarian free will. I've done past shows. I think I've done about 3 or 4 shows giving my take on that. But obviously there will be discussion points coming up to highlight the differences between us and sort of probe Val as to why does he take a compatibilist position on these various issues and that sort of thing. So the main difference I see is, look, David J is a hard determinist, or he's that version of an incompatibilist. He thinks that true freedom and determinism of whatever sort, Val is taking the physical determinism route, which I'm sure David J would take as well. They agree fully on that front, whereas I don't. I take an indeterministic. I have these little miracles that are inputted with every free will choice. So that part is true. Basically, the object of today's debate isn't going to be over the nature of determinism. So questions about Andrew's view on quantum indeterminacy, that's kind of beside the point. We're saying, what does it mean for an agent to be free? What is the nature of freedom? And that's where I think the dispute is going to be. David Johnson would say there's none. There is no freedom. Val would say, well, no, there is, of a certain type. And that's where he gets into his, his illusion type example that we'll get to and that sort of thing. Whereas for me, I say, no, it is absolutely genuine and it's incompatible with determinism. So I would take the route of definitely denying physical determinism, but also even determinism more generally in terms of our free will choices. So that's the positions in a nutshell. I guess just some opening questions. So we're probing Val's view here, and I just want to, so one last thing. So my plan of action to probe Val's view is to go over the 5 conditions for freedom and the differences between compatibilists and libertarians on that front. And I've got several questions for Val. So what are those 5 conditions for freedom? Well, Val has mentioned one, probably the most famous in the secular literature, which is what I'm calling the ability condition, otherwise known as the principle of alternate possibility. And there's a whole host of, well, what does that mean and what does that entail? The second is the control condition. In order to be free, you have to have some measure of control. Compatibilists would agree fully with me. It's just a debate on, well, what does it mean to have control? What's the nature of control to count as freedom? The next one is the rationality condition. So there has to be a rationale or reason behind your free will choice, and there's some differences there. The next is, well, what's the nature of causation? Val mentioned in his debate on Pora that he was a causal determinist, and his opponent, Aaron Fitzwater, agreed with me that the libertarian free will doesn't deny that there's a sufficient explanation or cause necessarily for our decisions and that sort of thing. But Yeah, okay, so sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But yeah, so the next one is the nature of causation. So there's differences there, and I'll explain a bit as we come to each section about where I think we would differ. And then finally, the fifth one is the person as an agent is necessary for the nature of the choice. You know, going back to Chisholm and that sort of thing with agent causation versus what I think Vaal goes for. So that's my plan of action. We're going to ask those questions. But before we get into those 5 sections, I just want to get to know what type of compatibilist you are a little bit. So first question, that was interesting take. So you went with physical determinism. Not all philosophers have gone with that specific version. So I know G. Moore does, for example, but other ones have gone for like psychological determinism or a more general. Why is it you think that physical determinism is needed, and could compatibilism survive even if you didn't go for that?
Well, I wasn't necessarily making the case that physical determinism was needed, but rather that freedom would be compatible with physical determinism, and that simply physical determinism of the type generally seemingly described by science seems to be the case, so we can basically go with that, and that's taking into account, like I said, the quantum indeterminism, and how I'm talking about the type of physical determinism that is generally used in science to predict things like the behavior of motion of atoms, rocks, etc. So that's what I mean. It just means, you know, if we're going to go with how the world seems to work on a scientific account, then and many people find that threatening, that I think we're completely compatible with that, to say, you know, I could have done otherwise. I could do A or B, or I could have done A or B.
Awesome. All right, cool. All right, so you answered 2 questions there in terms of incorporating the quantum indeterminacy question, so that's great. Now, in terms of types, would you classify yourself as a classical or a contemporary compatibilist? I think I know where you stand, but
I don't know, but I would guess probably more contemporary, because I think you know, I converge from what I can see with Dennett, and also certainly got some of my initial thinking from Dennett, and so I think he's pretty contemporary. So I'm presuming contemporary.
Awesome. All right, cool. And sorry, just for the audience, you want to just explain the difference there, if you don't mind, just take a couple minutes.
You'd probably be better at explaining the difference, so go ahead. You're more of a philosophy student these days than I am.
Very well. All right. So yeah, basically, the classical compatibilists would say that it's all about freedom is all about bodily action. That's what it's based upon. Whereas contemporary or hierarchical compatibilists, they would say, well, look, body action is neither necessary nor sufficient for freedom, and they point to certain counterexamples like kleptomaniacs or drug addicts and that sort of thing, where the body, yes. Exactly, yeah. So, all right, cool. So that's great. Last sort of general get to know you type question, and this one's going to be really important. I think I know based on what you said and prior conversation where you stand, but for the audience, there's a difference between hard and soft compatibilists. Yeah, like where do you stand and why?
I'm actually not sure what label I will end up with. You can tell me by the end of it if you'd like. I don't know that it's going to be too helpful right off to label it. So yeah, I don't know. Okay.
All right. Well, let me ask this then. Do you see it as at least possible, that it's a possibility that something like libertarian free will could be true? Is it at least possible?
Is it possible? Is it possible? Well, I mean, it's possible in the sense that I could be wrong, yes. But it doesn't seem feasible. Like it's like, I guess that's how Dennett put it in a good way, like philosophers or even theists or whoever can come up with the specs for free will, and then it can be up to a free will theorist to put the specs into practice. But whenever you try, or whenever I've seen the specs for libertarian free will try to be put into practice, it seems not to work, and to just to sort of bloom forth with sort of incoherencies and sort of non-explanatory power. So so yeah, it doesn't, I don't know about impossible, but it just doesn't seem feasible, I guess might be the word.
Yeah, cool. That's what I expected you to say, right? Like that's what your whole thing going back years is this randomness objection. And that's an objection that says, no, look, it's just not even possible. Libertarian free will just can't exist.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. If it's incoherent, it's not possible. So you would fall in the hard. I would categorize you as the hard compatibilist type.
Okay.
Yeah, personally, I don't know, but yeah, I'll let you speak for yourself. You're not 100% comfortable with that label. Okay. So I'm curious now. So compatibilists have specific. Now we'll get to this when we get to the 5 sections. So, okay. So let me get to the 5 sections of comparison based on the conditions for freedom. And this is starting with the most important, the ability condition, otherwise known in the secular literature as the principle of alternate possibility.
And I'm not promising I have the answers to these, by the way. So
well, I'm trying to keep it very, hopefully I'm trying to keep it very simple. I know the audience doesn't appreciate when I go high tech and stuff like that. So I'm doing my best to shorten this, keep it, helpful for the audience. I'm curious then, with the ability condition, are you familiar with G.E. Moore's case for compatibilism?
I know G.E. Moore, but I don't know his case for compatibilism.
Okay, gotcha. So this is going to relate to what David Johnson was asking about before, what he wants to know about, his objection to your view. So G.E. Moore, he based, okay, what is the alternate possibility or the ability to do other than we do, or at least to will to do other than we do? There's a distinction there, but what is that grounded in? What is that based in? And for Moore, it's based in modal, other possible worlds. Look, physical determinism and or causal determinism, whatever you want to say, is true. But if it's possible that there's another world where a condition, say 1066, William the Conqueror loses the Battle of Hastings or whatever it is. And because of that, we come to today and you make a different choice. You do otherwise or will to do otherwise than what you actually do. And he says, look, that sense of could do is sufficient to have the ability, to have freedom under this ability condition. So David would object. First of all, my question is that acceptable to you? I imagine it would be. And then how would you respond to David's objection? Some people, well, isn't that sort of leading to sort of a fatalistic notion?
Okay, well, geez, I guess this really starts off in the crux of it. And my answer could be pretty long because it really, I guess, it gets into compatibilism and what I would mean by could do otherwise. So you want me to just go?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay, so the description you just gave of G. Moore's, it was a little ambiguous to me whether it's one I would accept. I'm not sure if it meant precisely what I would be saying, so maybe I should just sort of say what I mean. So, if David wanted to put on, let's see, if David put on one shirt, he had 2 shirts he could have put on, and he puts on one, and they're both on the bed, and he's deciding between them, like, which shirt do I want to put on? And he puts on one. He's thinking that he could wear either shirt A or shirt B. That is possible for him to do. I can put on shirt A or I can put on shirt B, and then he's, surveying his desires, which one does he want to wear, and he decides for whatever reason that he wants to put on shirt A, the checkered shirt. And so he puts on shirt A, but then he also thinks, but he could have put on shirt B. So that is sort of a basic instance of deliberation and choice making, and I would say that that what he's thinking there is true. The mode in which he or any of us are thinking when we are deliberating and making our choices, we are actually thinking truths, and that is why it does seem true to us that we could do A or B, or could have done A or B. Now, how is this? So if it's because it's close to what you were mentioning about G.E. Moore, we're generally thinking in the form of sort of counterfactuals and conditionals kind of thing when we're like, if not explicitly, they can be explicit in our minds, but sometimes they're implicit. But so counterfactuals, conditionals are conditional sentences or ideas which discuss what could have been true under different circumstances. So from Wikipedia has it, if Peter believed in ghosts, he would be afraid to be here. Or I would say, if I had placed water in the freezer, it would have frozen, that kind of thing. Or if I had wanted to order dessert, I would have ordered dessert. So now this sort of goes back to my problem with the notion of freedom and the notion of possibility tied into it, that free will skeptics and libertarians think is required for a free choice to be possible. So the idea that under precisely, if you wound back a decision to the same state of the universe, every antecedent cause in place, you could have done differently. Basically, the idea that in order for it to be really true or reasonable to say I could have done otherwise, it has to be that I could have done otherwise under precisely the same conditions at the same time. And what I and most compatibilists would say is that number one is pretty much incoherent, but in a way more important, it's just not how we do and ever could think about the world, about our actions in the world, about what is possible in the world and what's possible for us to do in the world. We're just not thinking in that very strange metaphysical mode when we are thinking about choices. And to sort of what we're doing, like to say that I could, if I'm at the gym, I picked up the 45-pound weight, and to say I could pick up the 50-pound weight, or I could have picked up the 50-pound weight, I submit that those are just absolutely regular, basic, empirical claims of the same type that we make about anything in the world. The same say that water could be frozen if it's put in 0 degrees Celsius, that kind of thing. It's the only way we could think about the world. So, we're creatures. It seems, anyways, just except we're sort of traveling through time. Everything else in the world is traveling through time. We are never ever in the position of learning what happened with at one point in the universe, with all things the same, and running the experiment of showing that it could have been otherwise. That's just not a standpoint from which we could even reason about the world. It's impossible. Rather, the fact that we're continually flowing through time and everything changes, it forces us to reason with a certain level of abstraction that nonetheless is capable of, let's just apprehend and transmit the truth. So, for instance, just take water, the water in my cup right here. I can never understand the nature of water. The way I understand the nature of water and what's possible isn't to simply know what happened to water once under exactly one condition. It's to know what happens with water under relatively similar conditions or relatively different conditions. And that's essentially how science works. So the water that I'm looking at is sort of traveling through time. It's changing constantly. It's not exactly the same water, but it's essentially has the properties enough that I can identify it still as the same thing, water. And so if I put my glass of water in the freezer at 0 degrees Celsius and it freezes, then I am discovering something about the nature of water that I'm going to use to predict the nature of the next thing that is water-like enough that if I put it into a similar enough condition, it's going to freeze as well. If I was stuck wondering about what was possible with water only under one condition, for instance, the condition it's under now is that it is in warm air. I will never know that water can freeze if it's under the condition of warm air. I will always, every experiment is taking something that happened in the past and inferring what is likely to happen in the future with something that is put in essentially similar conditions, but not exact conditions. And that's how you find out about nature. And also you find out about the nature of things and putting them in different conditions. So if I put water over a flame, it's going to boil. So I've learned something else about water. So we are never in a position, like I said, to reason from the standpoint that where all conditions are the same. And so therefore we're always jiggling. We have to jiggle conditions in order to gain knowledge about what is possible for something. I have to accept jiggling conditions. I have to accept that that from the previous experiment I did with putting water in a freezer, that the next conditions I put in are not going to be precisely the same. They're jiggled a bit. It's a different day. I'm slightly different. Everything's slightly different. But the details are similar enough in the necessary ways to draw a conclusion about the nature of water and what it is possible to do with water. What's possible for water? It's possible for water to freeze, put it in 0 degrees. It's possible for water to boil if you put it over a flame in a pot, that kind of thing. And so when we're making a decision about something, like I'm going at the door to, and I'm deciding whether I'm going to ride a bike or walk to work, what I care about is my powers in the world, what's possible in the world, and what powers I have. And I do that by jiggling conditions, such as, if I want to, can I do this? So I want to do that, can I do that? And when I look back on a decision, if I wanted to ride my bike, could I have? Yes, I had the power to. If I wanted to have walked, could I have? Yes, I could have had that power. So it's really it's really about understanding the nature of the world, what is possible, and we do that by allowing for actually different conditions, and when we're making those abstractions, and what's powerful, what powers we have in the world, and we jiggle those conditions as well. So if I do I have the power to raise my right arm? Yes, I'm raising my right arm right now. Do I have the power to refrain from raising my right arm? Yes, I do. I'm not raising it. Could I have risen my right arm? Yes. How do I demonstrate that? I'm raising my right arm now. Well, how does that demonstrate that it was possible I could have raised it? It's because I'm raising it. It's because, just like placing water the next time in the freezer, I'm raising my arm under conditions similar enough to give me information about the powers I have in such conditions. If you change the condition enough, like I'm in the middle of a tornado or somebody strapped my arm down, well, then I can no longer make that extrapolation. But I can, it's just a plain old empirical claim to say that I could raise my arm or not, or that I couldn't have raised my arm or not, in the same way that we apply that same thing to scientific inquiry and literally everything else that we are reasoning about in the world. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Awesome. All right, thanks. So, okay, so under this ability condition, I have three things left to say. So I have one more question, an interesting question that I think you highlighted. Then I want to give my take on the differences between libertarians and compatibilists on the ability condition, or on this principle of ultimate possibility. Then I have a last final question. But before we do that, David, this was your part. This was the question you wanted to have Val address. Did he do so satisfactorily? Do you have any further follow-ups? Because this is your thing that you wanted to ask him about.
Well, so I don't want to bog the show down on it, but no. So I'm familiar with that line of argumentation, and I think that Val presents it quite brilliantly, just not convincingly for me. So yes, I understand that we don't normally reason that way. So if what you're saying is, well, you know, humans are bad at abstract reasoning, I agree. You know, we're very straight ahead reasoners when it comes right down to it. And so we do have the sense that we could have done something differently. And that's a very strong intuition, but it is an intuition that we have been able to experimentally exploit so many times that I don't see how one could be as convinced as you are about it, Val. So for instance, just as an example, let's take a hypnosis condition. You could plant a suggestion, a hypnotic suggestion in a person's mind that, you know, every time they saw a sunflower, they would sneeze and blink 3 times. So this is a suggestion that you plant when they're in a highly suggestible hypnotic state. And then they're now awakened and they go about their life, and they're passing the home and garden section of a store. They see a prominent sunflower out there doing what sunflowers do, and they sneeze and blink 3 times. Could they have done something differently? Well, of course, the intuition says. They could have not sneezed. They could have blinked twice, but in fact, they couldn't have, because their internal mechanism that tells them what to do at that time has been tampered with, and to the extent that we can, hardwired to do that thing. Now, the only difference is they are unaware of the hypnotic suggestion, but their being unaware of it is irrelevant. Their believing that they could have done something different is irrelevant. We can exploit the fact that they could not have done anything differently, and we can demonstrate that. And so you might say, well, I'm cheating because I'm then giving an example of a condition that's not normal. But I think the only thing you can say is that I am giving you an example and letting you know all of the conditions so that you can be consciously aware of them. And in real life, we are not consciously aware of the decisions. And so we might have some reason for not putting on the red shirt that is just as good, just as strong, just as hardwired as the person who sneezes and blinks 3 times at a hypnotic suggestion. The only difference is, in our example, we know about the hypnotic suggestion and we don't know about the other subconscious thing. And so I cannot actually accept your position on the basis of our ignorance of the causes. There are causes, and we are ignorant of them, but it doesn't mean that just because we don't know what made us raise our hand at that moment or say this thing or put on the shirt, it doesn't mean that there isn't a hardwired cause for it. And I think that what you are leaning too heavily on is the intuition that there is not a hardwired cause. And that intuition,
No.
I think, is extremely faulty.
No, at all. So that doesn't get to what I'm saying. And it started off right at the beginning where you're saying, well, we really feel like we have a choice between this. And then you sort of went on to say, essentially, but we don't. And you wanted to give an example where we don't. What I'm saying is that feeling that you could actually do, that you do have a choice, that you could take either action, that you could have taken either action, that's true in the case where you actually have that kind of ability. So you could, you do have an ability to wear different shirts or whatever. You don't have an ability to.
Well, but you don't. How do you know that? How do you know that I am not hypnotically presupposed to wear the shirt that I am wearing?
Because you can demonstrate it. Because it's like I say, okay, remember that any talk of what is possible for us, as on my account, is basically we are trying to understand what our nature is, what kind of powers we have in the world, therefore what type of actions we are capable of taking. And just as we want to know what the nature of anything else in the world, what the nature of a frog is, what it's possible for a frog to do, what the nature of fires or water, and you find out the nature of these things by experimenting, right? So now so if you wonder, can I lift the 45-pound dumbbell? Well, how do you find out? You go and you lift it. Can I lift the 50-pound dumbbell? You go and you lift it. That's how you find out. And so your example of person with the you have to demonstrate the power to do something. That's the power of freedom you have. You can be wrong about the power you think you have. So, for instance, in the sneezing and the sunflower thing, if I think that I have the capacity to sneeze or refrain from sneezing in the presence of sunflowers, I would be, if that's true, then I would be able to refrain from sneezing in the presence of sunflowers. But I could be wrong that I am free in that regard. It could be the fact that a suggestion is put into my brain and that when I tried to not sneeze in the presence of sunflowers, I couldn't help but sneeze. In that case, I discover actually, no, I am not free in regard to that subject. That's how you find out which ranges of freedom you actually have to do. You demonstrate whether you have the freedom to do X. I hope, did that land?
Well, no, it's working. It's still kind of working around what I'm saying. The only difference here that I don't think that you're fully acknowledging is that in the hypnotic suggestion example, we know about the hypnotic suggestion, and we can attempt to consciously control a test to see what we can do.
No, but it doesn't matter whether it comes from a hypnotic suggestion or not. That's irrelevant.
Okay, but in real life, though, we don't go around consciously testing to see what we can do unless there's a reason to do it. So when you put your shirt on this morning, I don't think that you went through a conscious test of, could I put this other shirt on? You put the shirt on.
That's right.
And so you don't actually know that you could have done the other thing. You weren't doing A/B testing. We're not walking through life doing A/B testing. And we are not aware at any given moment what our brains are capable of at that moment. So yes, I know that I have the ability to lift a 45-pound weight.
How do you know that?
I know it because I have lifted 45-pound weights.
There you go.
That said, if someone put a 45-pound weight in front of me right now and said, lift it, I don't actually know if I can or not, because at that moment, my brain might misfire. I might not be able to lift it. And so I can't fully accurately predict that I can lift it. And I can't just wave off the experiment and say, oh no, I know I can lift 40 pounds because I've done it before. And so you are assuming, I think, a lot about the brain state of what we're calling choice, simply because in the past, in similar circumstances, you have done things that seem like the opposite thing. But what you don't know is if any given moment, any menu of possibilities is actually open to you or not. And you're just assuming that all of the menu of options are open to you. And in the face of examples where it certainly wouldn't be open to you, you think they're open to you, and you think you've decided, yeah, I'm going to put on this shirt, or I'm going to buy that brand of cereal. But if we were to interrogate that moment, it could be that we find out, actually, nope, you couldn't have done anything else. So you could be wrong about whether you could have done it or not. And you're not, I think, acknowledging how wrong we could be in any given moment about what we could do. I think you're relying too heavily on past inference and intuition. But that said, I don't think that's going to change the further conversation. And I know that Dale wants to move on from here.
I just have to address that because it gets so into exactly what I'm trying to get across. So what you're not taking on board there is, once again, that the claim is a standard empirical claim. We're physical objects in the universe like everything else, right? And so what you're doing is you're special pleading that in order to have sort of confidence in what we could do, it seems like you're almost saying, like, well, we have to have, almost absolute knowledge of what we can do, but we don't have absolute knowledge about anything. Everything is just confidence levels based on past experience. So, I mean, it's like saying, well, if I put water in the freezer, I don't really know that it's going to freeze so long as it's 0 degrees Celsius. I don't really know it's going to freeze. All sorts of logical possibilities could happen. An alien could stop it, or maybe we're completely wrong and suddenly physics changes to where, like, nobody reasons like that. You just say, no, we've got enough standpoint built up to have reasonable expectations built on past experience of what seems to be the nature of water, that it will freeze. We don't have to be absolutely sure about it, but we.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything remotely like that. And one of the things that I think.
No, but you were when you were saying that I don't know if I could pick up that 45-pound.
So
but you do, in the sense that you have every expectation from past experience that you, in all probability, can. So the idea that you can't absolutely know is just, it doesn't matter.
Well, let me put a bug in Dale's ear, because I want the conversation to go in this direction eventually, but is to discuss the nature of what a choice is. Again, this will be a thing that I will be very quiet about. But you're talking about water freezing. That's not a choice. That's matter being affected by environment. Okay. I would argue that actually what we think of as choice is very similar to matter being affected by environment. But Dale would not, in fact, think of it that way. And I think that you, with your compatibilist notion, are almost thinking about choice the way Dale would think about choice, which is something that's outside of the matter and environment. So that you're saying, well, but it has this other thing that it could do. Water does not have another thing that it could do in freezing temperature, and we know that. The difference is we know the narrow range of what can happen with water, and we don't know the range of our own thoughts and choices, because we are assuming that we have more than we actually do. I can this happens all the time with people. They get into accidents, they kill themselves on bicycles, skateboards, any number of things, because they have a great deal of confidence in their abilities, because they've done it a million times. They know what it feels like. They know how to ride. They have good balance. They're fine. They don't need the helmet today. They didn't need the helmet yesterday. Bang, they're dead. Their confidence is not equal to the physics of one moment after another.
Yes, they can be wrong.
Yeah, and so in the same way that you think that you are confident that you could do another thing in a different physical moment, I think is equally unjustified. You simply do not know, and you have to take account all of the things that are acting on this thing that you would consider choice in the first place. And so the nature of choice becomes important in this conversation. That's a part of the conversation that I'm going to step out of, because I'll be honest with you, I don't understand the nature of what a choice is. I would just say that it's a physical. I am a physicalist and a materialist. I see no reason to speculate that it is anything else. But if I am right, and if it is purely a physical material thing, then it is also determined by physical material things. And if it's not, if it's something else, then I think that leaves a lot of room for libertarianism as a thing acting in opposition to matter and environment. So so that's a good intermission. I will give it back to you and Dale, and you can call me when needed. I'll go sit in my comfy chair.
All right, cool. And David, that's the whole point of what I'm going through. So by the end of this, I'm hoping when I go through the 5 conditions for what it means to have a free choice, I'm hoping that you'll that's what a choice is on Val's view versus Dale's view, and you can decide and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's what I'm attempting to do. We're looking at the first aspect. Okay, well, in order to have a free choice, there has to be this ability, this alternate possibility that a free agent has the ability to do otherwise than what they actually do, or at the very least to avoid problems, to intend to do other than what they actually do. So this is the first aspect that we're kind of going over. But all right, cool. So not to waste too much time. So Val, before I explain my take on the differences between us, I had one last question for you about your grounding of compatibilism and what is the grounding for our ability to do otherwise. So you kind of gave your take on G.E. Moore. I wanted to get you kind of mentioned that there's issues, we're approaching this metaphysically. Most philosophers approach this ability condition as a metaphysical condition. But there's another philosopher that I think might appreciate, Dr. Susan Wolf. And for the audience, I'm going to be on my RSM blogs, I'm going to be posting up all these papers so you can go and actually read them and that sort of thing. But Susan Wolf in 1980, she had an asymmetrical hybrid version of combining libertarian free will and compatibilism, a very famous paper called Asymmetrical Freedom and that sort of thing. And she said, look, you guys are missing the whole thing, getting into metaphysical qualms about what it means to have the ability. Really, it's a condition of moral value. That's what's fundamental. That's how we base someone's ability to do other than they do. So she would say, well, look, I'm a full-on determinist or compatibilist when it comes to doing morally good actions. So this has theological ramifications. God is God free and stuff like that. You'll see the relevance here. And she'll say we're totally determined when it comes to doing morally good actions and that sort of thing. The compatibilist view is true because in order we do the condition is you have a morally good and sufficient reason to do other than you do or something like that. And in the actual world, if you do the morally good thing, well, you're already acting on the good and sufficient reason. So the only way you could have the ability to do otherwise is if you appeal, like, gee, more to a counterfactual world or something like that. But libertarianism is true if somebody does an immoral thing because they're not acting on the good and sufficient reasons that are demonstrated in the way that you talk about with your bells, right? So let's say the example she gives is somebody, oh, I should go to the hospital to visit my friend and do that's the moral. I have good and sufficient reasons to go and visit my friend in the hospital, but I'm lazy. I'm going to stay home and read a book. So there's good and sufficient reasons in the actual world, and that's demonstrated from prior experience. We know that it would be good, because last time we did go and stuff like that. So I just wanted to throw it open to you. Have you ever heard of these sort of hybrid views, and what's your take on Susan Wolf's view of grounding the ability condition in morality rather than a metaphysical thing?
Well, actually, I guess I didn't make it clear. I believe I mentioned at one point that I'm actually trying to not talk about metaphysics. My position is that that when we are making choices, we're not doing metaphysics. I'm trying to ground that right in the empirical world, I guess, just as I think, if I got that right, as Susan Wolf is. If that's what she's trying to do, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say it's a mistake, essentially, to think that there has to be a metaphysical explanation that would grounds our freedom, and that our freedom, that is our understanding of what is possible, what our powers are, is arises from and is completely consonant with how we explore everything that is possible in the world. It's just standard empirical thinking, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
And if you, we can get to morality and all that kind of stuff. And also, it doesn't even on a sort of compatibilist sort of view. Like I said, it's sort of what matters for our freedom is what powers we have now, and it doesn't even necessarily matter what the antecedents were or the explanation of how we got here. So you could take me and ask, do I have the ability to pick up this cup right here? Yes, I do. I can pick it up and put it down. Do I have the ability to refrain from picking it up? Yes, I keep my arm on the armrest. And then let's imagine like another version of me is just recreated instantly in a world atom for atom, just like this, but it popped out of nowhere with no antecedents. What matters for free will is simply that version of me has the powers I do or not, and can demonstrate the powers that I think I have or not in the world. So I don't know if that.
I think you kind of, there's a slight misunderstanding. Yeah, when you read the paper, I'm probing you, so that's your answer. But you wouldn't. So Wolf is a libertarian free will when it comes to immoral actions, and she's grounding that in. So you're saying, yeah, you would agree with that. So you are, when somebody does something bad, you're a libertarian free willist. That doesn't sound what you would say.
No, I wouldn't.
Okay, so yeah, so there's a bit of a difference then.
Oh, for sure, it's libertarian, yeah.
Yeah, but it comes down to the fact that it's the morality of the action. If it's immoral, it has to be libertarian. Why? Because the condition of the ability is grounded in having a morally good and sufficient reason to do other than you do. And there is a good and sufficient reason for that guy not to read his book, but to do other than that and go and visit his friend in the hospital in the actual world. You don't have to postulate possible worlds or something like that. So if you ground it in the morality, then you have to go, yeah, libertarian free will is true. Now, the vast majority of philosophers like myself would disagree with grounding it in moral actions. That condition of moral value is meaningless. We have free will in non-moral matters all the time. So I think approaching it metaphysically and or physically like you do is the right way to go. But I just wanted to throw that out because there is some interesting
Well, I mean, I guess maybe I misunderstand something because I'm not understanding that as libertarian free will. Libertarian free will. I mean, like sort of on morality and I guess compatibilism. You know, I'd say sort of morality is what we ought to do, and then we can look at the commonly accepted proposition in moral theory that many hold to, not everybody, that ought implies can. The idea being that it only makes sense to say we ought to do X so long as we can actually do X. It makes no sense to tell me I ought to disobey the physics of the universe if I can't do so. But also, it doesn't seem to make sense to say I ought to do X if I can do X but couldn't do otherwise. So just as it wouldn't make sense to tell me I ought to stop obeying the physics of the universe, it would be just as strange to tell me I ought to obey the physics of the universe, because I have no choice but to obey them. So what is telling me I ought to obey them actually add? So it seems we want to reserve ought for cases where we have choices, the capability to do otherwise. And so long as we have the option of doing or refraining from what we ought to do, that establishes a justification for introducing what we ought to do and the basis for moral reasoning. And I think compatibilism establishes a sense in which it's possible to do otherwise, our powers in the world. And then it makes sense to start talking about grounding morality and what we can and can't do. And like you appealed to Susan Wolf there, and whether we have the reasons which entail we ought to do X over Y, et cetera. And that gets into other things about how we not only have basic reasons for actions, we can represent our reasons for the action to ourselves. We have sort of higher order selection processes where we can survey our motivations and our reasons and see which ones cohere most with our beliefs about and reasoning about the world, and which ones make most sense to follow, that kind of stuff. So I mean, I think it's all compatible with physical determinism, and I don't see any problem with anything.
All right, cool. So yeah, just wanted to probe your views. So just for the record, both Val and I think that Susan Wolf is wrong with her condition of value. Ultimately, once properly understood, I'll just say, yeah, please read her paper and on my website and let me know what you think once you've read her in her own words. But
you know what, Dale? I actually, because you mentioned in an email, I did in an email that might bring her up. I actually went and took a look, but I didn't end up getting through the whole thing. I only got through part, which was actually lots of her giving her rather good arguments against libertarian free will, right? Before she, ends up solving it, as you just explained it. But it's worth looking for as much for just seeing some succinct arguments against libertarian free will before she brings her own solution.
Yeah, she fully agrees. She's a determinist when it comes to morally good action. So absolutely, yep, cool. All right, so here's my plan for the last little bit on the ability condition. So I'm just going to give a brief my take. Val's already hinted and stuff. So the fundamental differences I see it on the ability condition between compatibilists and libertarians like myself and most Christians are, okay, so for Val, he would offer a one-way or what's called a hypothetical or a conditional ability to do otherwise. So had some condition been different, let's say 500 years ago, King Henry VIII didn't chop off Anne Boleyn's head or something like that. So the causal chain could have led you to do other than what you do in the actual world. So this is known as a hypothetical ability or a conditional ability on the condition that some external feature is different or something like that. Some external condition is different, you would have done otherwise. For libertarians, on the other hand, no, this is a categorical ability, or as Val hinted at, it's a dual ability. We both have the ability to do or to will to do, and also to refrain to do, or to choose to refrain to will to do. And it's what Roderick Chisholm calls it's a branching notion that I heard Val. So at any given time t, I have multiple possible options in the actual world that I can choose to actualize through the exercise of my free will or something like that. Whereas for Val, no, there is only one possibility. Given the conditions in that causal chain are what they are, it will come out the same. You'll make that choice every time. It's determined in that way or necessitated by those causal things. So that's the fundamental difference in how we see it. And the last question on the ability condition, rather than appealing, obviously I believe in this dual ability based on common sense experience, properly basic belief, but we also have scientific empirical evidence that backs us up. And I'm appealing to the Benjamin Libet experiments here. And usually this is cited against libertarian free will, you know, with the readiness potential feature, that brain state arrives, then you become aware of your intention to lift your finger or not. But because we're probing Vaal here, I want to raise actually Benjamin Libet scientifically falsified that by proving that there's this free want phenomenon, another brain state which allows us to refrain, you know, that dual ability to refrain. Even after people have had this readiness potential, they become aware of their intention to lift their finger or not, they have the ability to veto that decision afterwards. So yeah, my question to you, Vaal, is how does something like the free want ability fit into compatibilism as you see it? Does that provide any credibility for libertarians' notion of this dual ability at all?
Well, it's interesting you're citing Libet, right? Because usually he's deduced as evidence against free will, right? His original experiments.
Absolutely, and that's why I'm appealing to him, because that's the common view, but actually his scientific experiments prove the opposite of what determinists want. So that's why it's cool to bring up.
Yeah, well, I do remember reading also about that aspect as well, but I'm not recalling all the details, so I don't feel like I can comment really specifically on it. I don't see where I don't see where it's established that it is some contra-causal form of action. And if somebody had actually scientifically established contra-causal action, contra-causal choices, I think it would have been a bigger story than what you're getting.
Let me just step in real quick. I'm going to use one of my coins here to interrupt and get a clarification. For Vaal, what Dale was saying, they're characterizing your thought process. I wanted some clarification on. So, if we rewound the universe to 5 minutes ago, are you with me that you would do exactly the same thing?
Yes.
In the
yes.
rewind. Okay.
Yes.
So you're not suggesting that there would be some way to pop yourself out of that causal chain and do something different.
No.
If you did it the first time and you rewind it to exactly the same conditions, you do it the second time. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Then the second time through, if I can use some really sloppy language, you would be a second time determinist. You'd be a videotape determinist because it's on the tape and it's determined, and it doesn't matter how many times you watch it through. So the only thing that we're actually differing on is the first time through. And I'm suggesting that I don't see anything fundamentally different between the first run and the second run.
Well, I don't really either. I mean, I think that whatever state of the universe results in my making a choice, if we rerun to exactly that same state of the universe, that's going to include my brain states, and whatever led to the choice, I'm going to make the same choice every time. So, I mean, it's the same for the first as the second as the third. But what this is missing is that, and what, when you were talking about how water doesn't have a choice, so what that was missing is, of course, water doesn't have a choice as far as freezing or boiling, that kind of stuff like that. But the example of water is only used as to how we talk about empirical possibilities in the world. What does it mean to understand the nature of something and the possibilities in the world? So I'm just going to ask you, is it possible to freeze water in 0 degrees Celsius?
Yes.
Okay, then that's the truth about water, isn't it?
Yes.
And it can be any variety of water. It doesn't have to be the exact same water. It doesn't have to be water at some selected time in the universe and only that time and only under those conditions. It can be water under any variety of relevantly similar conditions that will cause it to freeze, right?
Yes.
And so what we really want to
It's
know
not
about
a choice. Water. It's just what will happen
Exactly.
under that circumstance.
Exactly, but it is a possibility. That's what
No,
we.
it's not a possibility. It is what will happen under that circumstance. You said very eloquently a little bit ago that it doesn't make sense to talk about two things to talk about altering to do something that you can't do or altering to do something that you must do. And in this case, you're talking about a possibility, as in, water ought to freeze at a certain. No, it doesn't ought to. It's not a possibility.
Yeah, no,
It
it's not at all.
simply is the nature of the thing.
That's right, exactly. You're trying to describe, if you were to try and describe the nature of water, like say somebody, a science teacher is describing the nature of water, how would he possibly do it without describing the varieties and ways water acts under different conditions? For instance, water, if you place it in 0 degrees, would freeze. Water, if you place it under a certain amount of heat, will boil into vapor, that kind of thing. It's talking about water in different conditions or relevantly similar conditions where you actually are able to describe the nature of water. And if you're saying that that isn't to say that it's possible to freeze water in 0 degrees, are you saying there's no such thing as possibilities and that all such talk we have to abandon? And where are you going to go with that?
Yeah, I think if you're saying it's possible for water to freeze at 0 degrees, you're missing the nature of water. It's not a possibility, it's an is. It's just an is of the universe. I think that this will be more clear when you get into the nature of what choice is.
Well, that's just what we're into that with the 5 conditions.
Right.
But
So I wanted to interject that because I wasn't entirely sure what Val's stance was on the rewindable the second time through determinism type thing. So
David, is it untrue? Is it untrue to say that if you put
hang on, Val, Dale had.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, so we're going to get into the second condition, the control condition, and we're going to that's where we're going to get into Val's notion about, well, what is it that makes someone have control that's sufficient for freedom? He can talk about natures or certain states that are internal or something like that. I was going to be asking about that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to that section because I think that's quite germane. And so I'm going to throw it back to you, Dale. I appreciate the clarification, Val. I'm not going to promise that I will not do this again at some other point. But for the audience, in case anyone besides me got lost, I'm making up terms because I don't know the real ones. And so my made up term, which makes sense in my head, is second time determinism and first time determinism. And if you're a second time determinist, you got to be a first time determinist too. It's just determinists. And there's no fundamental difference between the two runs in physics. So Dale obviously does believe that there is a difference between those runs, and I'm interested in the discussion as they talk about how that initial run is made in the first place. So we will take you back to your regularly scheduled program.
Okay.
All right, awesome. And Val, obviously you're the guest. It's your view. So when I go into this section, you can take some additional time to continue on with that water thing because the audience wants your view. But let me try to wrap it in to this issue of, okay, there's the second condition for freedom. What is a choice? Well, in order to have a free choice, the person, the agent or whatever it is, has to have control, sufficient control. And both libertarian free will people and compatibilists would agree on this. But once again, we differ. What does it mean to have control? So With most compatibilists, and I'm going to be asking Val his specific take as to how it works. What is it that differentiates an uncontrolled action from a controlled free action, that sort of thing? So with libertarian free will, obviously we as the agent, we have full control over our actions and that sort of thing. We have that dual ability and that sort of thing to choose or not to choose. And by the way, it's just saying minimally we have a dual ability. Maybe you have 5 options or 6 or something like that or whatever. But here's a helpful analogy that will differentiate the position. So here's David Johnson's hard determinist options. Let's picture a row of all black dominoes. You knock over the dominoes, boom, 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 causal chain, one thing after another. It's physically determined. Great, no freedom. You know, all the dominoes are black. You'll get to the end of the sequence, all the dominoes will fall. That's David Johnson's hard determinist view. Val's view is, as a compatibilist in general, I shouldn't say Val's view because I don't know, but in general, compatibilists will say, well, no, the black thing, that isn't sufficient for freedom because none of those black dominoes had control in the causal chain at any point. So it has to be a special causal chain. And in order to be compatible with freedom, some of those dominoes have to be painted green. And if you knock over that first black domino, it runs through and it knocks over the green ones and then gets to the final end black thing, the exact same sequence as David Johnson's, except that some of those dominoes are painted green. That's sufficient for freedom. So what would those green dominoes, what's the difference? Again, it's all physically determined, just like David. Why is green special compared to black? And what they'll say is, well, those green dominoes run through the agent in a special way. The causal chain includes within it certain brain states. So, you know, it involves their natures, their beliefs, their desires. And if a causal chain, even if it's determined, runs through causal chain that includes those elements, that's sufficient for freedom. Again, I'll turn it to Val in a second to explain if he follows with that or has something different or would tweak what I said there. But in a nutshell, that's the difference between David Johnson and Val's compatibilist version. Val says in order to be determined and free, there's got to be some green dominoes in there. Now, me as a libertarian free will person, again, I have those probably those same green dominoes. But in essence, there's a domino that's me as the agent, and I can choose whether to fall or not. When that determined domino knocks over me, comes to the domino that represents me, I can say, you know what, I'm not falling. I don't have to fall over just because you hit me. Or pretend there's a branching path. There's, you know, 3 or 4 different paths that the domino can choose to fall into. So the thing hits me, no matter where it hits me, I'm not determined to fall one direction or the other. I can choose I'm following this way. So that's the branching libertarian option. So I hope that helpful analogy explains the 3 different positions. If not, Val can let me know. But yeah, Val, I want to turn it straight to you. You're the compatibilist. Have I used this domino analogy properly? How does control work? What does it mean for a causal chain to be controlled in a way that's sufficient for freedom in your view?
Okay, so yeah, I'd like to get to that. But David, can I ask, is it possible to pause for a moment? Or should we keep going?
It is possible to pause for a moment. Is it the red?
Okay, so Val, yeah, we left off. I was just asking you about the control condition, and I just gave you a simple, you know, what are those green dominoes under the compatibilist view? What are the internal states, or you know, the internal states that are relevant for sufficient control for freedom in your view?
Well, I would say okay, so for the dominoes example, where you talked about the green dominoes in a compatibilist sense, and singling those out as having different properties, I would say generally what you described would be pretty accurate. to what I would say is a compatibilist, and that so long as we can point to agents in the chain who are making decisions, who have sort of beliefs, desires, have the ability to reason about which actions are likely to achieve those desires, and who can think about the reasons for action, all these type of things, and to understand their powers for action, and also and predict what they can likely do or not, then that gives those entities the control. They are making the decisions. You don't get, there's a sort of a mistake. There's this mistaken idea that comes out of this sort of domino view that where it kind of makes, it ends up, people use it to kind of make the agent sort of invisible in the process, as if the first domino caused the green dominoes, the agential dominoes, caused those choices. And that's not really ultimately a very good, fruitful, explanatory concept, because like in the case of we use the dominoes, it's almost like the beginning of the Big Bang. You could replace with the dominoes, but stick with the dominoes. If you explain the decisions through the chain of causation that started with the first domino, you can say that pushing over the first domino was sufficient to cause my choices ultimately, because it ultimately did end in the chain of causation that caused them, but it's not necessary. That domino wasn't necessary for causing my choices, because you could have replaced that initial domino with a red domino or a white domino or a bigger domino, that kind of stuff like that. You could have made an entirely different domino pattern leading up to me, and I still could have, as long as the pattern just before my choices are similar enough, I could have made the same sort of decisions. So it doesn't really explain much. So you really have to look at it's sort of like saying the necessity versus sufficiency of freezing water. If I put water in the freezer and it freezes, my placing the water in the freezer was sufficient to cause the water to freeze, but it wasn't necessary to cause the water to freeze. Somebody else could have placed it in there as well. Any number of scenarios could have the water being placed in the freezer and it would still freeze. So so my putting in was sufficient, but not necessary. And where we get, we sometimes want to know what was sufficient to cause something, sometimes what was necessary to cause something, and sometimes knowing what is necessary gets us the kind of information we need to understand and predict the world. So it tells us more about water to zero in closer to the event and understand that what was necessary was that, for instance, the water be made to 0 degrees Celsius, that the water was made to cool to 0 degrees Celsius. That was the necessary part to cause water to freeze. And all sorts of different sufficient conditions can result in that, but it's that you're getting the information about the nature of water, really important information, by identifying what's necessary to cause it to freeze. And therefore, you can set up all sorts of different sufficient conditions when you're camping, when you're at home, all that kind of stuff, when you want to make ice cubes, to cause water to freeze. And it's the same thing in identifying our choice making in the chain of causation. Some people make this idea that that if you haven't accounted for, explained all the causes that preceded your choice, well, then it's really not up to you, and you haven't really accounted for the choice. But that's just not, as I say, how most of our explanations work. We actually parcel down, we we segment portions in causal chains in order to gain knowledge, usually predictive knowledge. So for instance, if an airplane line kept crashing, and then it was found out that it was a certain fuse that kept going bad, say the red fuse, nobody would think that when the guy representing the airport, so the airline, would get up and say, well, look, yeah, there's, somebody said, some technicians have said, yeah, the red fuse caused the crashes from the navigation standpoint, but really, that really isn't the explanation for what caused the cabin. We really can't say that, because really you can't explain, what caused somebody to make that fuse and then what caused that and all the state of the universe all the way back to it. What you really have to do is you have to give me a full account from the beginning of the Big Bang right up to the crash, and then we really explain what caused the crash. Like, that's obviously completely unworkable. No, we identify parts in the causal chain that will give us the information to understand and predict things. And if you start at the fuse was the proximate cause of the crash, that tells us, okay, if we change the fuse to a proper fuse, then the airplanes will fly properly. And it's the same with identifying our decisions in the causal chain. You don't have to go back to the very beginning. You can just identify our deliberations as essentially the proximate cause of our actions, and that's the agential cause, as it were.
Interesting. Awesome. Okay, so yeah, just two quick things. So fully agree with Val about his point about sufficient versus necessary conditions with the initial thing. Although I liked Aaron bringing that up as kind of a counter to the randomness objection or something like that. But yeah, absolutely. You could have a red domino as the first one, and boom, 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 the green ones will still fall and that sort of thing. I think that's totally irrelevant to what we're discussing here, though, in terms of the control condition. That ultimately, do those green domino, whether it's a red, black, white, blue domino, that's the first one. Fact of the matter is, none of those green dominoes actually had control. And I like that. It's interesting that you mentioned, well, this analogy is kind of manipulative because it loses the agent. I'm going to be, when we get to the fourth condition, yes, I'm going to be saying that's deliberate. You don't have agents. But again, that's when we get to discussing the nature of causation. So yeah, it's an illusion. There is no agent. There is no control.
But you can't, you basically just admitted that you haven't made an actual analogy to agency. So it's an unfit analogy in that sense. I mean, if the dominoes are doing things that an agent or can't do things an agent can do, then no, I wouldn't say they're in control. They're just acting like dominoes. So you've left the agency out. So it's not a fit. You can't base your conclusion that the determinism means that there's no agency there.
So I'm saying yes, it is a fit analogy. When you get past all the semantics, as you call it, when you were talking about the illusion and stuff, I do see your notion of control and saying, oh, you can use the word agent, but there really is none. That you literally are a domino. All those special states, and this was going to be my second question. I shouldn't be arguing, but it's just arbitrary. You said, well, it involves beliefs. Oh, it involves the person's nature. All of those are all.
That's not arbitrary. That's genuinely what it means to be an agent.
Okay, so let me put it this way. Let me ask you the question. So the states for you that are the green dominoes that have to be involved, that count as sufficiently having agential control, our beliefs, desires, and our nature. Any other green dominoes? Anything else I'm missing there? Or?
Well, for instance, physical capabilities to carry out the actions we desire to take, etc.
Okay, cool. So why is it art? Why is my question to you is, why these sets of properties? That seems almost arbitrary. What is it if ultimately my beliefs are caused by Alexander the Great's conquest? It's all caused in one kind of thing. I've had in what sense do I have real control over these states? It's not a real control and that sort of thing. So it just seems arbitrary. Oh, well, beliefs, desires, nature, we'll paint those green. No, they're really black. They're really black dominoes.
So you're doing exactly what I just argued was the mistake. When you talk about, for instance, what was Alexander's conquest or whatever, some state way back in the past being the cause of my decisions, I'm saying no, that actually doesn't make sense. It's a mistake that is similar to the fallacy of composition. You know, where so the fallacy of composition is something where you think that something that's true of the part must be true of the whole. So, you know, if we have cherry pies, I've used this example before, you have cherry pies and you say, well, do cherry pies exist? And then somebody says, well, hold on, look through the micron, micron microscope or the atomic microscope. And all we see actually down here, the atomic level, are just little atoms and electrons flying around. And there's no cherry pies down here. Well, what's the expectation that cherry pies must be made of little cherry pies all the way down in order for cherry pies to exist? I mean, that's pretty absurd. You can just acknowledge that yeah, it's made of an arrangement of matter and energy, but matter and energy arranged in different ways, basically from their different entities arise with different natures. So, you know, the tastiness of cherry pie, the sweetness, the redness, all that kind of stuff. And you'd have an agent, you know, also experiencing those who are also made up of atoms. But I mean, it's just a fallacy to say that if you go looking down the ontological scale with an arrow pointed downwards, and you say, oh, there's no cherry pies down here at the atomic scale, so cherry pies don't really exist. You're looking at it the wrong way. You got to point the arrow back up to see at the level at which cherry pies exist. And the same thing is happening, I think, when you and other people are saying, like, well, look, my choices, yeah, I'm in the causal chain and I'm doing some causing of choices, but my choices were caused by this causal chain that stretches way, way back. And so, you know, I can say something like, you know, the conquest of Alexander ended up possibly causing my choices. But what you've done, just like in going down to the level of cherry pies where there's no cherry pie, is you've chased the train of causation back to where there is no me making choices. In fact, there's nobody that could be making the choices for me. The environment is not an entity, it's not an agent. It couldn't make the choice. History is not an entity that can make choices. The Big Bang is not an entity that can make choices. So my choices are not, for instance, chosen for me. And the fact that they're caused or determined doesn't, it's just question begging to say that simply because they're caused or determined, they therefore aren't real choices. That would be question begging. So if you want to identify what is actually making the choices, it's me in the causal chain that produces those choices. They are not, my choice to ride a bike is simply not going to happen without me going through the deliberations and making that choice. And they are up to me. They're not going to happen. Even if there is a chain of causation leading to it, if you want to understand the choice, you've got to be looking at the point in the causal chain to explain that decision.
Awesome, thanks. And yeah, again, sorry, I shouldn't be debating with you because it is about your view and that sort of thing. But
that's fine.
I did want to kind of highlight there is that difference for compatibilists. Look, and I will back Val up. When I had Chris Date on my show, he said the same thing. He has slight differences as a Calvinist because it was kind of a theological type thing. But he said this domino analogy is totally unfit. He preferred to use the characters of a novel and the author of a novel or something like that to keep this agent involved type thing. Again, ultimately, I don't think it's a mistake. I just disagree with Val. I think it ultimately, Val's talking semantical fluff to a libertarian. It really reduces down to dominoes. It's that simple. But am I committing this fallacy? Are libertarians committing this fallacy for Val? So that's what the audience should be thinking about and assessing. So
Dale, can I just say, a lot of people try and describe this the way you did as just semantics or even semantical fluff, as you're saying.
Yeah.
But it's not. What it is an argument of consistency. It's not simply making up concepts to save an idea of free will. It's looking at how we actually reason about the rest of the world and noting what the implications are for how we reason about ourselves. So I'm making an argument for empirical consistency. So if you can demonstrate that you can freeze water by putting it in a freezer, I can demonstrate that I can lift my arm by lifting my arm.
Gotcha.
And it does, and it's not and cannot be dependent on being able to do so under precisely the same conditions and time. Even Christians never actually can run that experiment for all the normal empirical entities that you're interacting with. You actually do accept the reasoning that I am describing for how we sort of abstract and do experiments. And it's inconsistent to reject it, to say that it is therefore incoherent when applied to other empirical objects such as ourselves. What is possible for us to do?
Let me interject here before you.
Okay. I do have one important. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. But can we try to get it finish in 10 minutes? Because I have one last question on the control condition. That's really important.
Yes.
That's cool.
I just because this is an important point of disagreement that I think should be highlighted, and another clarification moment for me. So Val, I think I definitely understand what you're proposing here about, there's no need to go back to the beginning of the Big Bang to figure out why the last domino fell. We don't need to know about the dominoes prior to that. Not all of them. We don't have to go back very far. But I am concerned that we are not defining something very important, which is choice itself. What is a choice? What is a decision? What is a desire? What is a goal, an evaluation? So this is not a question that most people are familiar with or used to hearing, but I'm thinking at a physical level, what is this thing that we call a choice? So if we're talking about a computer, I think we're hesitant to, we may use some anthropomorphic language and say, it chose to do this instead of that. But in our minds, we don't assign agency to computers, even though they go through decision trees and come up with decisions. We don't think of them as agents in the same way as humans. They do a thing that is physically traceable, and we categorize that in one way. But when we're talking about humans, it seems like we're talking about it in a different way, as if our choice is a fundamentally different kind of thing. And so for a materialist like me, I would say that our choice is not a fundamentally different kind of thing than a thing that a computer does. It's the same kind of thing. It's exactly the same kind of thing. And this is where the Christians would obviously disagree. They would say, no, we're not just machines doing machine-like things. And so I need some clarification from you, Val. Do you think that we are machines doing machine-like things, or are we something different? Are we a different kind of agent doing some other agent kind of thing when we are making a choice?
Well, I think that we are a kind of machine doing machine-like things, but we can do things that computers can't do. Basically, that freedom comes in degrees. You can just talk about any instance about what something is capable of, what it's free to do. So I have so as I said, I've got desires, memory, rationality. I can reason about the things I hold to be true. I can think of my desires. What would I like to do? And I can reason about what action is most probable to achieve that desire. And I have the physical capabilities to take that action. And so that's sort of an agent taking action there. I have a degree of freedom about things that my computer in front of me doesn't. Like, I can get up and walk out of this room. That's a type of freedom. That's a capability my computer doesn't have. And I could also choose not to. So I have the option to walk out of the room or not. And I can base that on my surveying my desires and my beliefs and what action is most reasonable to take to fulfill my strongest desire.
Okay, but do you acknowledge at least that those things that you talk about are just electrical impulses
Yeah.
in the brain and nervous system?
Yeah, and you can talk about computers having degrees of freedom too. I mean, some computers have more capabilities and more degrees of freedom than other.
So the fact that we have a more sophisticated neural net doesn't change the physicality of what's happening.
Right.
Okay, so that's fine. Then I understand where you are, and our ideas align there. I know that Dale is going to get there. Dale, I promised it would be less than 10 minutes, and so I will go back on mute. Thanks.
Awesome. All right. Just so I know, because we're only on condition 2 of 5, are we limited in terms of time? Like, should I be rushing a bit more, or how are we doing, Val? Like, obviously, me and David go long. It's all on you. Like.
Oh yeah, no, I can keep going. My voice is starting to go a little bit, but I'll let you know when I got to throw in the towel.
I'll try to interject less too, but I can't promise because when something needs clarifying, I got to do it.
Okay, so I'll try to rush a little bit more on mine.
Right.
So last question.
Go ahead.
Control condition, Val. So great, grand, and groovy. Let's pretend everything you say is true. Big problem for you compatibilists that secular philosophers refer to as causal deviances. You're familiar with that, I take it, or?
Well, if you outline it, I may have heard of it.
Okay, so it basically libertarian free will philosophers will point to all those factors, all those causal things being present that you're talking about, but where somebody doesn't have freedom. So perhaps there's a causal chain of someone wants to be a spy. They're in a coffee shop. This is a famous example, and
oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So they're going to signal the Russians are coming by spilling their cup of coffee or something. So they have all the right beliefs, they have all the right mental states, nature, desires, whatever those green dominoes you want to say, to have control. But because they're nervous, actually they knock over the cup of coffee by accident. So this is called a causal deviance. All the factors that Val's saying are sufficient for real control, for control of freedom, are present, but yet that wasn't a free choice. He knocked that over by accident. So yeah, I just wanted to get your take on causal deviances there.
Well, yeah, so I would say in knocking over something by accident, it is it doesn't represent the person's desire. So it's not the it's certainly possible, but it's not the type of that it doesn't represent what he desired to do.
I'll just say
what we care about.
Sorry to interrupt. In this example, no, he was desiring, he was intending to do it, but it's just before he could purposely. Yeah. Sorry.
I see. Okay, sorry. So right. So in other words, he intended to knock over the cup of coffee as a signal. But as it happens, he sort of knocked it over, not due to a direct deliberation, but by mistake. But it achieved the same thing that he desired. Is that basically it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So my sort of just concern there is just asking questions like, was he capable of knocking over the coffee or not? You want to say was that up to him? I would say that just on its face, it doesn't seem like it would be a mistaken action would be up to him. It's not how he planned it. It's what he wanted to do, but not how he planned it.
All right. Okay. Awesome. All right. Cool. So I'll move on then, just to make sure. So the third condition for freedom, what does it mean to make a free choice, is called the rationality condition. Once again, well, actually, there is some disagreement here. So, Val, I take it as a compatibilist, you would say, yep, there's definitely got to be a reason or rationale for every free choice and that sort of thing that people do. Libertarians, for the most part, agree with this. I do. But there are some examples where they'll say, well, there's non-rational choices or something like that, like twiddling your thumbs or something.
Yeah.
Do you think there's possibilities for that? Or those free actions, or no?
But are they? Yes, they're free. They're free. Well, basically, I think free will generally is concerned with deliberative actions. And then you can sort of expand it out a bit to ask whether you're free to twiddle your thumbs or not. And if you are, then that's a free action. If you're twiddling your thumbs because you want to, and also you could refrain from doing it, then that was a free action. But generally, we're most concerned with deliberate actions.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, well said. I do agree that the deliberative actions is usually where it's at and that sort of thing. Okay.
Can I would mention, actually, no, you probably, if I would interject something about that subject just for a second, if you don't mind. It's one of the things that bothers me about free will skeptics cases such as Sam Harris, who will take inferences from things like meditation to say that we are really not in control of our choices, because when you really look into how thoughts arise, they are mysterious. We aren't in control of how our thoughts rise, and therefore we can't really account for why any particular thought arises. So he'll basically take this as a lesson from meditation, where you are going to a meditative state and just you simply watch thoughts arise, and you notice that they just seem to be popping out of nowhere, and then the inference from that is, oh, therefore I can't account for why those thoughts are arising. They just seem to be happening without my willing them, and I can't account for them. Therefore, I have no account for why any thought arises. That just sort of, it wipes out a certain sense of agency and understanding of why I do what I do. But that's a mistake similar to what we were just talking about, in that what we care about is deliberative action, deliberations about action. And I've used this analogy before, but the concept from the Sam Harris type skepticism in using meditation is like saying, like, well, if you're driving and you just learn to let go of the wheel, you'll notice that nobody seems to be driving the car. Well, yeah, once you set up that condition, that's right. So it's the same with of just wiping your mind and not having any deliberations and just watching thoughts appear. Yeah, that's how they're going to happen. but that doesn't mean that we don't understand why we have certain thoughts or think what we do. Once we get into deliberation, then we do. So Sam Harris, I've heard him use this example like to a crowd, like to say, like, for example, everybody here think of a restaurant. And then he'll say, well, you'll notice that that just popped into your mind. And you really can't account for why that particular restaurant popped into your mind. Well, what he's doing is he's putting the audience into a non-deliberative scenario by just watching things pop in your mind. But if he had said it instead of like, I want you to think of your favorite Italian restaurant, well, then certain very specific ones will come to mind. And actually, it's very likely you completely can account for why that particular restaurant did pop to mind. It could be, this restaurant, you learn to love a certain type of pizza in Italy, and this local restaurant seems to produce it most authentically, and that kind of stuff like that. So you can account for your thoughts as once you get into deliberation. So that's why I'm talking about free will tends to be about deliberation and not just random stuff appearing.
Awesome. Yep, I would fully agree. So that was one of my questions. So I'm going to let that be the answer. Although I will just say, for the sake of the audience, it's interesting Val's talking about deliberation. That's libertarian free will talk. That's not the mainstream position of compatibilism in general. They won't speak, or there's controversy as to we'll say that Val talking about deliberation is illusory again. So I don't want to go down that road, but just so the audience understands, there's controversy as to what we mean by deliberation and whether or not compatibilists actually engage in real deliberation.
There's controversy about every single thing we've said, isn't there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right. So I have two further questions. I'm going to ask them both at once just to save time, and then this is where I'm going to give David Johnson what he's been asking for. I'm going to give him my definition of the role that reasons play in making a choice. So what does it mean to make a choice? I'm going to give that definition, then we can move to the fourth criterion and that sort of thing. But Val, so two questions for you on the rationality condition, two more areas of controversy. So the first one is compatibilists don't believe in final causes. They only believe in efficient causes, the means by which an effect is produced in this cause and deterministic cause and effect thing. Whereas libertarian free wills, at least in general, again, Val might surprise me and not go with the mainstream, but in general, compatibilists will deny that there are any such things as final causes. The teleological goal, end purpose as to why. Why is why is the stove on with noodles cooking the pot? I wanted Kraft dinner. That's why the molecules are bubbling and stuff like that. So that would be a final cause. Do you admit that there are things as final causes? And number two is the controversial issue of acrasia, or weakness of the will. Compatibilists generally will deny that there is any such phenomenon. You have to go, well, and I've heard you do this with me in debates when we first started, is no, there's at one time whatever is the strongest desire or preference, that wins out. So there's always that rationale. Whereas libertarian free will people say, no, there are cases of acrasia, weakness of the will, where my desire preferences are still maintain their hierarchy. Like with smoking or something like that, my strongest desire is not to smoke. I want to be safe. That's still set in stone, but I have this weakness of the will, and I've described that mechanism on my end as sort of a reorientation of the will. But again, this isn't about me. So Val, yeah, those are the two questions. Are there such things as final causes, and what do you make of the phenomena of acrasia?
Okay, so final causes. Well, okay. When I hear final causes, I tend to start thinking of Thomism and that kind of stuff. But I think I could say, I don't think there's a final cause in the sense of, the God being having a teleological direction for everything for us. But insofar as you accept the idea that an agent, that even in the case of God, a final cause is his ultimate end for anything that he has set in motion, or his purpose for anything. Well, I think we're agents and we can have those as well. I guess you could call those final causes too. So if I have if I want to just make somebody laugh, I might be my final cause that they laugh. But I don't see that this poses any problem for compatibilism. And as far as the weakness of will, I have no problem actually with the idea of the weakness of the will, but it would be in a relative sense, and I think it's helpful to think of it in a relative sense. There's no absolute weakness of the will. As you said, generally some will or some desire is going to win out, and we are always in deliberative actions acting on one or more desires. So we always have at least something strong enough motivating us for any deliberative action. But we can talk about weakness of the will in a relative sense, that we may also, it's just a reference to other strong desires we may have, that we are finding ourselves not able to act on, that other desires are winning out over those desires, even though we do have some level, even though we have some reasons to have those other desires, so just, kind of thing of, eating a donut when you would prefer to, stay slim, that kind of stuff like that. You're always going to be acting on a desire, but it does make sense to say that you have a weakness of the will in the relative sense that your desire to eat the donut won over the other thing you also desire, which is to stay slimmer. So in a relative sense, I'm fine with the weakness of the will.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I want to make sure David has enough time to control the show and probe both of us or do what he wants to do with the show. So
I'm fine. Don't worry about me.
I would like to go back to something with you, David, unless you want to bring something up.
Look, I'm here to be a sounding board,
Okay.
so bring it. But yeah,
Yes.
I'm fine with the way the show's going. I find the conversation fascinating. So yeah, sure.
And I appreciate Dale being hammered on very much by all your questions. So no, it's been great.
Yeah, and no, I'm being respectful too. I'm not trying to, hopefully not coming across challenging. I want to address challenging issues for your view and see how you respond and that sort of thing. So yeah, and I think you're doing a great job on that front there, Val. So one thing I promised David Johnson, sorry?
I think Val had a question for me just before you get there, Dale. What can I do for you, Val?
Okay, actually, Dale, do you want to get to your promise? I want to make sure you get in whatever you had planned.
I was just going to read off my definition of what I think a choice is, because
sure, great.
So I think that Alexander Proust gives the best definition that I take. So I'm just going to read his because I think I couldn't phrase it any better. So it's basically, look, person X freely chooses A because X is making a free choice between A and B while being impressed by the reasons in S, a set S or something like that. So that's that rationality condition. We are impressed, not determined or influenced or something like that. So he says, on my hypothesis further, had the agent chosen B in this set of circumstances, the agent would still have been impressed by the reasons in S, but the choice of B would have been explained by X's freely choosing A between A and B while impressed by the reasons in T, where T is a set of reasons that favor B over A. So last sentence, I promise. Moreover, in the actual world where A is chosen, the agent is also pressed by T. However, in the actual world, the agent does not act on the impressive reasons or exercise their will on the impressive reasons in T, but on the reasons in S. And this gets into my notion of acrasia and how we choose to orient our will. So I mentioned Dr. Tamar Shapiro, and I think I'm going to post up her book on free will. It's a fascinating read. I don't agree with everything she gives here. I've Christianized and modified her ideas or simplified it a bit, but I think it comes down to this orientation of the will. We maintain preferences in terms of desires. There is no reordering and that sort of thing. And reasons, we can orient our wills towards, by our own free choice, to certain reasons, and then we make the free choice accordingly and that sort of thing. But it's where I would Tamara Shapiro would more say, we're not freely choosing to reorient our wills. She thinks, has this kind of weird idea where human beings are dualistic in their minds. So they have their civilized brain and they have their animal brain. The animal brain sees the world as simply teleologically infused. You know, like a cat sees a couch, it doesn't see the object itself, it sees that scratchy thing. I don't know how to describe it properly. Or sees a cake, chocolatey to be eatenness. They see like purely teleologically refused. So that when someone commits acrasia, they are retreating, letting go of their burden of freedom and retreating into this animal mind. And she says that's determined. I would say no. First of all, there's no animal mind, but they're reorienting their will, and that's a free will choice towards a set of impressing reasons, one or the other. And that helps to explain their choice and addresses this randomness objection to a point. Obviously, Val's going to say, yeah, but it just kicks it down. What explains you orienting your will one way or the other and that sort of thing. But yeah, I just wanted to say that because David was asking for that all throughout the show. So I would use Alexander Pruse's definition there. That was not
Okay.
helpful.
I think I have enough on my hands just trying to explain what I mean. So I'm not going to, challenge into that.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. I'll leave it.
All right, I will. I think that's a fine definition if all we care about is intuition. So, yeah, intuitionally, that's what we all mean by choice. But when I ask the question, I don't really mean intuitionally. I don't mean what it feels like we're doing. I mean what is physically actually happening. What is this thing? The ontological nature of the thing that we call a choice. And so I don't think that really gets at the bottom of that. And I have some thoughts that I'd like to share later on this subject, because I think it's going to come up in your conversation. Let me just preface it with this. I think sometimes the word choice in a conversation like this is misleading and maybe just an accident of language. I think that a better word might be motive. What motivates a ball to roll downhill? We can talk about that, a motive force. We wouldn't say, why did the ball choose to roll downhill? We could talk about the motivation that got the ball rolling downhill. And so when it comes to moral failures, I don't think it's helpful to say, well, you chose this one moral option as opposed to another. But it is fair to say that there was some motivation pushing you in one direction as opposed to another. And the challenge is knowing what those motivations are. And I would say that that is the black box, ultimately, that you don't know what those motivations are. You think you know what those motivations are. You think you are going through all of the options. You think that you believe that option A is the right thing, but you do option B anyway. Well, the fact that you did option B means that there was some underlying motivation pushing you toward option B that you simply don't have access to. And you are not, in fact, in a good position observationally to say that you chose option B as opposed to chose option A. All you can say is that there is a motivation that pushed you toward a thing that consciously you might say, that's not the way I would want to go. But there is some underlying motivation that pushed you there. And so I don't think that you can call it a moral failure because you made the worst choice. You actually made the best, quote unquote, choice you could because you are following motivations that you could not resist. And so I think we will get there, like I said, but that's kind of a preview of some of those thoughts. And I think part of the problem is just linguistically, when we call everything a choice, that means something in the vernacular that I don't think it means in this discussion.
All right, cool. Thank you for that, David. All right, cool. So I'm almost, believe it or not, I'm almost done, and I can pass the reins back to David to probe Val or me, whatever he wants to do with what we have left of the show. Sorry, it's taken way longer than an hour. But okay, so Val, the fourth condition for freedom is about the nature of causation. And if you remember when we addressed the control condition, you were saying, but you're losing the agent with these dominoes. And I'm saying, yup, you're darn tootin' I am, because the nature of causation. And this is a difference in the main. So Val is supposedly a weirdo as a compatibilist, because the mainstream views, if you're a compatibilist, you only believe in event causation. One event causes another, and blah, blah, blah. And this is what a hard determinist like David Johnson also believes in, and that sort of thing. Whereas it's libertarian free will advocates that say, like Chisholm, who say, no, there is agent causation. We are an unmoved mover, a prime mover within the causal chain. That Val called that a miracle and stuff. And yes, that's proof. We have supernatural proof every day when I make a free will decision on libertarianism and that sort of thing. And the dualism interactionism problem and stuff like that is proven right there from our experience on libertarianism, right? So this is a fundamental difference, at least in the mainstream philosophers and in general. Compatibilists have to deny agent causation. Now, Val, you're not doing that, which is surprising. So do you want to maybe just sort of speak as to this issue? Because I've always heard it as, no, on a compatibilist view, if somebody raises their hand to vote or something like that, no, really, the libertarian just says, well, Jones rose his hand. Why? Because he made a free will decision to vote for Tom Jones or whoever it is. But on the compatibilist view, there's only event causation. So you have to say, well, no, he blah, blah, blah happened, blah, blah, blah happened. This caused a brain state in his head, which has caused a certain belief, and this caused the desire to do this. So these states are the ones causing Jones to raise his hand. It's not about agent causation. I want to raise my hand. I'm a prime mover. Yeah, what do you make of this distinction between the two causations, and how do you go for agent causation? That's not typical.
So I would say that was a mistaken characterization. It's conflating. It's sort of presuming the idea that the only concept of agent causation is the one that's become common with theists, where it's a sort of it's a buck stops here form of agent causation, which sort of a physical determinist wouldn't believe in. True, we don't. If that's the type of agent causation you're referring to, that's right. Compatibilists don't believe in that. None that I know of. But that doesn't mean compatibilists don't believe that agents exist and that don't cause things. We do. It's just fully physical, just like computers exist and cause things. And we are physical beings, but like I said, we've got desires, the capacity to rationalize about how to achieve desires. We have physical ability to carry out the actions to fulfill our desires. It's all physical, and we're agents, and those are agential causes. My choice was caused by an agent. It's just not a magical version of agency. Did I miss anything there? Did I answer all the questions?
One last one, if that's okay. And
Sure.
I hope you're enjoying this.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I was just trying to. Okay, I can't leave. So I was wanting to. So the last condition for freedom, the fifth and final one that differentiates libertarians and compatibilists, is the issue of kind of piggybacking off of this. So Val is saying agent causation. That's not just for libertarians. Compatibilists can get it too. Great. Well, now we have a challenge. Well, what does it mean for a person to be an agent? And there's a fundamental difference between libertarians and compatibilists. I think Val might surprise me and go the libertarian route or something. But again, persons on the compatibilist view in general are seen as just a series of events or a causal chain. This is the causal theory of action that philosophers of action lay out and stuff like that. And that it sounds to me, for the most part, Val is going along with that. So here's the fundamental difference here is that compatibilists tend to see people, especially with Val, who's a physical determinist. He just said people are physical things. So that means there are different, what is the nature of a thing? And there are three types of things in ontology. There are heaps. Obviously, persons are not heaps, right? That's a heap of sand or a heap of salt or something like that. It's very loose kind of unity. The second type of thing that has a unified type of thing is a property thing. And this applies to physical things and stuff like that, physical brains, our universe. And then the final thing is the substance, a substance. Now, as a physical thing, Val, and just like compatibilists, would have to say, well, people are really property things, just like your table, just like blah, blah, blah. Obviously, there's differences, but I mean, in essence, they're property things. They're not substances. Libertarian free will people go for substances. And I wanted to put up a table, but I don't know where I have it electronically. I have it in my book. I don't know. So I'll just read out some of them. So for example, a property thing requires two categories to classify it. So for example, a car is not a car, it's shaped metal at its essence. Whereas substances just require one category to classify them. You know, Fido is a dog, Jim is a human, whatever you want to say. Another difference here is that, well, how do property things derive their unity? Well, physical property things derive their unity from one, an external principle in the mind of a designer. And again, I'm not talking God here, but I'm just meaning any designer that artificially imposes that from the outside. Or two, contingently entering into a set of external relations from a whole. Whereas substances, they're different. They derive their unity from their own internal essence or nature, which serves as a principle of unity from within the substance. I've got about four more. Should I read through these or just like summarize with one more? Like here's one last one. So, okay, another difference between property things and substances. Property things, their wholes have no new properties, not in parts, except, oh, that's not the one I wanted to. Okay, so, okay, yeah, here it is. So parts are metaphysically prior to the whole with property things. The existence and nature of the whole depends on their parts and or their relations. With substances, no, it's the opposite. The whole is prior to its parts, so that the parts are what they are in virtue of their function within the whole. And that's what informs or employs them and that sort of thing. Like I said, there are three other distinctions. I'm not going to get into it unless Val wants me to. But my question to you, Val, is that compatibilists seem to be saying that persons are property things. They're physical property things. Their brains, whatever it is, they're not actually substances in their own right. And true free will seems to presuppose that people are substances. At least in the literature, that's been the fundamental debate. So, yeah, what's your take on that issue?
I'm not sure. I might not have followed how that actually bears on a problem for compatibilism. I mean, I think maybe this doesn't get directly to your question. I mean, I think, you know, the idea that things have natures seems to be a pretty necessary assumption, and a nature is I guess what it is to sort of be and act in the world. And you could even say that to have a nature is to exist. And so we want to understand the nature of things in the world and the nature of ourselves. That's what the sort of the project is for our actions in the world. But when it comes to what you just described, the difference between the substance, et cetera, I think I just didn't follow how it bears either way. I'm sorry. My brain is starting to fry, but that's where I am with that. I'm sorry.
No worries. No, thank you. So as promised, that's it for all my questions. I managed to get it out. Everybody have a great day. I hope you enjoyed the show between me and Val here, and with David Johnson as well, on the nature of free will. Yeah, have a great week. Bye-bye.